The Galactic Council had spent 3 cycles monitoring the small, blue planet they designated as Terra 3. Initial scans revealed a species that appeared primitive by galactic standards, still using chemical propulsion for space, travel, and crude energy systems. The beings called themselves humans, and most civilized species dismissed them as another, developing race that would take millennia to reach spacefaring capability. Ambassador Zephyrian of the Kellery Collective adjusted his sensory appendages as he reviewed the latest surveillance reports. The humans fascinated him in ways he couldn't explain. Unlike most species that evolved from prey animals, creatures that developed intelligence to hide from predators, these humans seemed different. Their forward-facing eyes, their upright posture, their strange social behaviors all suggested something the Council had never encountered before. Fascinating, he murmured to his aide, a nervous Forthan named Kulik. Look at these behavioral patterns. They organize themselves into competitive groups, engage in mock combat for entertainment, and display unprecedented aggression toward their own environment. Kulik's tentacles writhed anxiously. Perhaps we should maintain our distance, Ambassador. The initial reports suggest they're quite violent. Zephyrian studied a particular video feed, showing humans engaged in what they called American football. Massive creatures covered in protective armor crashed into each other with bone-crushing force, while thousands of others watched and cheered. The violence was coordinated, strategic, and somehow beautiful. No, my friend, I think we need to understand them better. The ambassador's attention was drawn to a series of documentaries that human satellites had been broadcasting into space. One particular transmission caught his interest, something called the History Channel. For days he watched in growing amazement as humans recounted their own past. Wars that spanned continents, weapons of unimaginable destruction, conflicts that raged for years, decades, even centuries. But what truly disturbed him was the realization that humans weren't just violent, they were systematic about it. They studied warfare like other species studied mathematics. They had academies dedicated to combat strategy. They wrote poetry about battle and created art celebrating warriors. Kulik, come look at this, Zephyrian called, his voice tinged with something between awe and terror. The footage showed human soldiers moving through a jungle with mechanical precision. Their movements were fluid, silent, and utterly predatory. These weren't beings defending themselves, these were hunters. And not just any hunters, but creatures that had turned hunting into an art form. This is impossible, Kulik whispered. Intelligence doesn't evolve in apex predators. The energy requirements alone. Yet here they are, Zephyrian interrupted, a species that evolved from persistence hunters. Look at their physiology again. Those eyes aren't for watching the skies for threats. They're for tracking prey. That upright stance isn't for reaching food in trees. It's for covering vast distances while chasing down animals that should be faster than them. The ambassador pulled up another file, this one focusing on a subset of humans from a landmass called North America. The data showed that these particular humans, Americans, they called themselves, had taken their species' predatory nature and amplified it to an extreme degree. They had created weapons capable of destroying their entire planet multiple times over. Their military technology was advancing at a rate that defied galactic understanding. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to approach warfare not as a necessity for survival, but as a science to be perfected. Sir, Kulik stammered, if this data is accurate, these Americans have been in a constant state of warfare for over 2 centuries. They've fought conflicts on every continent in every environment imaginable. Zephyrian nodded grimly, and they've won most of them. Even when outnumbered, even when fighting on foreign terrain, even when facing enemies who should have every advantage. A new transmission caught their attention. News footage of American soldiers training. Zephyrian watched in fascination as these humans practiced scenarios that seemed impossibly complex. Urban warfare, jungle combat, Arctic survival, desert operations. They trained for every conceivable environment, every possible enemy. But what truly chilled him was the realization that this wasn't just military preparation, it was cultural. Young American humans played games that simulated warfare. They watched entertainment that glorified combat. They celebrated individuals who had excelled at organized violence. Ambassador, Kulik's voice was barely a whisper, we need to warn the Council. If these humans ever develop faster than light travel, Zephyrian was already drafting his report, but he paused at his aide's words. The thought had occurred to him as well. Every galactic civilization had developed along predictable lines. Intelligence emerged from prey species that learned to cooperate for survival. Warfare existed, but it was defensive, reactive, aimed at preserving life and resources. But humans, and Americans in particular, had turned warfare into something else entirely. They had taken the hunting instincts of their ancestors and applied intelligence to them. The result was a species that didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win, to dominate, to perfect the art of conflict itself. The ambassador's research revealed that Americans had a saying: if you're not first, you're last. This wasn't just about competition. It was a fundamental worldview that drove them to excel at everything they attempted, including and especially warfare. As Zephyrian compiled his findings, he realized that the galaxy was about to encounter something unprecedented, not just another intelligent species, but intelligent predators, beings who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of hunting, of warfare, of turning conflict into victory. And among these hunters, the Americans appeared to be the apex predators of apex predators. Click, he said finally, sealing his report for immediate transmission to the Council. I believe we're about to discover that the galaxy has been a very peaceful place simply because we've never encountered true hunters before. The transmission fired off into space, carrying with it the first warning that humanity, and particularly American humanity, represented something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that would change the balance of power among the stars forever. As Zephyrian watched the data stream disappear into the void, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The humans were advancing faster than anyone had predicted, and the Americans among them showed every sign of being the type of beings who wouldn't be content to simply join galactic society. They would seek to dominate it. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 civilizations gathered to hear Ambassador Zephyrian's report. The circular amphitheater, carved from crystalline formations that had taken millennia to grow, had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. High Counselor Vrax of the Terran Oversight Committee called the session to order with a harmonic chime that resonated through the chamber's bioacoustic systems. His species, the Melody, had evolved from creatures that spent their lives hiding in musical caverns, developing their civilization through harmony and consensus. Ambassador Zephyrian, Vrax's melodic voice carried across the chamber.
Your preliminary report has caused considerable
concern among the council members. Please elaborate on your findings regarding species designation HUMAN. Zephyrian rose from his delegation's seating area, his Kellari physiology allowing him to interface directly with the chamber's holographic display systems. Immediately, images of Earth filled the space above the assembled delegates. Honored counselors, he began, what I'm about to share challenges every assumption we've made about the development of intelligent life. The first image showed early human ancestors on African plains, chasing down massive animals across vast distances. Unlike every known sapient species, humans didn't evolve from prey animals seeking safety in numbers. They evolved from persistence hunters, predators that used endurance and intelligence to exhaust their prey. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The Quirian delegate, whose species descended from small burrowing creatures, visibly shuddered. Impossible. Predator species lack the social cooperation necessary for advanced intelligence. That's what we believed, Zephyrian replied, switching to footage of human warfare throughout history. But humans developed something we've never seen, cooperative hunting that scaled to include thousands, then millions of individuals working together to destroy their enemies. The images showed Roman legions moving in perfect formation, Viking longships coordinating attacks across vast distances, and modern military operations that required split-second timing across multiple continents. They don't just hunt for food, Zephyrian continued. They hunt ideas, territories, resources, and each other. Warfare isn't an aberration in human society. It's the driving force behind their technological development. High Counselor Vrax's harmonic voice carried a note of discord. Surely there must be peaceful factions among them. Zephyrian's response sent chills through the chamber. That's what makes the Americans so particularly dangerous. They represent what happens when the most aggressive humans form a society, dedicated to perfecting aggression. The hologram shifted to show the American continent, then zoomed in to show military installations, weapons testing facilities, and training centers scattered across the landscape like a vast network of predatory infrastructure. The Americans have been at war, either directly or indirectly, for 90% of their existence as a nation. But they don't see this as a problem to be solved. They see it as a skill to be perfected. Delegate Krenth of the Pacifist Alliance, whose slug-like species had achieved spaceflight through purely defensive technologies, raised a gelatinous appendage. Surely their aggression makes them unstable. Self-destructive? On the contrary, Zephyrian replied, bringing up economic and technological data. Warfare drives their innovation. They invented powered flight to gain military advantage. They developed computers to calculate artillery trajectories. They achieved nuclear power to build weapons. Every major technological advancement in American society has military applications. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vorthon delegation huddled together, their tentacles intertwined in a protective formation that their species hadn't used since their homeworld's predator crisis ended 10,000 years ago. But perhaps most disturbing, Zephyrian continued, is how they think about conflict. Most species view war as a failure of diplomacy. Americans view diplomacy as war by other means. He displayed recordings of American military academies, where humans studied battles from thousands of years of history, with the same intensity other species devoted to art or philosophy. They have individuals who spend their entire lives studying nothing but how to destroy enemies more efficiently. This is madness, whispered the ethereal collective's representative, a being of pure energy who had never encountered the concept of physical violence. How did such creatures achieve civilization without destroying themselves? Zephyrian paused, knowing his next revelation would be the most unsettling. Because they've learned to channel their aggression outward. Americans in particular have created a society that rewards aggressive excellence. They celebrate their warriors, they honor their military leaders, and they've built their entire culture around the concept of competitive dominance. The hologram showed American sports stadiums filled with screaming crowds, their faces painted with tribal markings as they watched gladiatorial contests. It showed business environments where humans competed as fiercely as their ancestors had hunted mammoths. It showed entertainment media that glorified violence and depicted warfare as heroic. They've created a predator society, Zephyrian concluded, and now they're on the verge of leaving their planet. High Counselor Vrax's harmonic voice cracked with dissonance. What do you recommend? The ambassador's response would haunt the council for cycles to come. I've analyzed their technology curves, their social patterns, their military capabilities. In less than 50 standard cycles, they'll achieve faster-than-light travel. In less than 100, they'll possess weapons that could threaten entire star systems. He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle over the chamber. But here's what truly terrifies me. They won't see the galaxy as a community to join. They'll see it as territory to claim, and the Americans will lead that expansion. The silence stretched for long moments before Delegate Krenth spoke in a trembling voice. Then we must stop them. Quarantine their system. Prevent them from developing FTL technology. Zephyrian's laugh was bitter. You don't understand. We've been monitoring their progress for 3 cycles. In that time, their military technology has advanced more than most species achieve in 1,000 cycles. They're not just developing FTL, they're developing it while simultaneously perfecting weapons of mass destruction. The ambassador brought up final images, American military research facilities where humans worked on projects that defied galactic understanding, weapons that could crack planets, defenses that could stop entire fleets, technologies that seemed impossible given their current level of development. They don't just want to reach the stars, Zephyrian said grimly. They want to conquer them, and based on their history, they probably will. As the council chamber erupted in panicked discussions, Zephyrian stood quietly, knowing that everything was about to change. The galaxy had enjoyed 10,000 years of relative peace because every civilized species had evolved from prey animals who valued cooperation and harmony. But humanity was coming, and they were bringing war to a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight. Commander Sarah Mitchell adjusted her position in the pilot's seat of the experimental spacecraft, Phoenix Rising, humanity's first faster-than-light vessel. The cramped cockpit smelled of ozone and fresh electronics, a sharp contrast to the infinite void beyond the reinforced viewports. After 18 months of testing, today marked humanity's first official journey beyond the solar system. "Control, this is Phoenix Rising," she spoke into her headset. "All systems green for FTL jump to Proxima Centauri. Estimated flight time 47 minutes. The voice of ground control crackled through the speakers with typical American confidence. "Copy that, Phoenix. You are go for jump. Remember, Commander, you're not just representing NASA today, you're representing the human race." Sarah smiled grimly. At 34, she was a decorated Air Force pilot who had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts before joining the space program. The transition from dogfighting over hostile terrain to navigating interstellar space felt surprisingly natural. After all, both required the same fundamental skills: quick thinking, aggressive tactics, and the ability to dominate your environment. Initiating FTL drive in 3, 2, 1. Reality twisted around the Phoenix Rising as it slipped into hyperspace, leaving Earth behind in a blur of distorted starlight. For the first time in human history, one of their kind was traveling between star systems at speeds that defied comprehension. What Sarah didn't know was that her ship's emergence from hyperspace triggered alarm systems across half the galaxy. On the monitoring station orbiting Kepler 442, Technician Vorth's multiple eyes widened in terror as his instruments detected the impossible. "Supervisor, emergency signal from Sector 7 Alpha." Supervisor Clax rushed to the console, his chitinous shell clicking against the deck plating. The hive mind species had maintained this early warning network for centuries, watching for any sign that dangerous species might develop interstellar capabilities. "What am I looking at, Vorth?" "Faster than light signature, sir. But the energy pattern is completely unknown. It's not using any recognized FTL technology." Clax felt his stomach drop through multiple chambers. "Source? Sol system, sir. The human system." The supervisor's worst fears were confirmed. 3 cycles ago, they had received Ambassador Zephyrian's warnings about the aggressive predator species called humans. The Council had decided to maintain observation protocols while debating appropriate responses. Apparently, they had waited too long. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell was experiencing the strange calm that came with successful completion of impossible tasks. The Phoenix Rising dropped out of hyperspace exactly where it was supposed to, and Proxima Centauri blazed before her like an angry red eye. "Control, this is Phoenix. FTL jump successful. We have arrived at Proxima Centauri system, right on schedule." The celebration at Mission Control was audible through her speakers, but Sarah was already focused on her secondary mission parameters. While the public believed this was a simple test flight, her real orders came from a different source entirely. "Phoenix, this is Blackbird Control." A new voice cut through the celebration. The frequency was encrypted and Sarah recognized the code words for Special Operations Command. "Initiate Reconnaissance Protocol 7. Sarah's hands moved automatically to a separate control panel hidden beneath the main console. "Copy, Blackbird. Deploying deep space surveillance package." As Sarah released a cluster of advanced monitoring satellites around Proxima Centauri, she was unaware that her actions had just established humanity's first intelligence network outside the solar system. The satellites, designed by a cooperation between NASA and the military-industrial complex, were capable of detecting and tracking any technological activity within a 50 light-year radius. Within hours, they began transmitting data about alien activity throughout the local stellar neighborhood. Back on Earth, General Patricia Hawkins reviewed the incoming intelligence reports in a secure facility buried beneath the Colorado mountains. As head of Space Command's Extraterrestrial Defense Initiative, she had been preparing for this moment since the discovery that Earth was under alien surveillance. "Ma'am." Her aide, Colonel Rodriguez, handed her a classified tablet. "The satellites are picking up massive amounts of alien traffic. Looks like we've stirred up a hornet's nest." Hawkins studied the data with the same intensity she had once applied to analyzing enemy troop movements in Afghanistan. "How many different signatures?" "At least 30 distinct FTL patterns, General, and they're all converging on our local sector." The General's smile was predatory. "Outstanding. Looks like we're about to make some new friends." She turned to address the room full of analysts and military planners. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just learned that we're not alone in the universe. More importantly, we've learned that our neighbors have been watching us without permission. The room buzzed with tension as hardened military professionals processed the implications. These were men and women who had spent their careers preparing for conflicts against human enemies. Now they were facing the prospect of warfare on a galactic scale. "Sir," spoke up Major Kim, a tactical analyst, "shouldn't we consider diplomatic contact? Perhaps they're peaceful?" General Hawkins pulled up a holographic display showing the alien surveillance network that had been monitoring Earth for years. "Major, would you consider it peaceful if foreign satellites were watching your house without your knowledge?" The room fell silent as the implications sank in. From an American military perspective, the aliens had already committed an act of war by conducting unauthorized intelligence-gathering operations. "Here's how we're going to handle this," Hawkins continued. "We're going to assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. We're going to prepare for the worst-case scenario. And we're going to make sure that if anyone starts shooting, we're the ones left standing." She gestured to the display of alien FTL signatures. These beings think they're dealing with some primitive species that just stumbled into space travel. They're about to learn that they're dealing with Americans. The briefing continued for hours as military planners outlined scenarios for everything from first contact to full-scale interstellar warfare. What emerged was a strategy that reflected humanity's uniquely aggressive approach to problem-solving. While other species might have focused on peaceful communication and cultural exchange, the Americans were preparing to establish military superiority from the very first meeting. They would approach any alien contact as they approached every other challenge, with overwhelming force and the assumption that conflict was inevitable. As the meeting concluded, General Hawkins issued orders that would shape humanity's entry into galactic society. "I want every military asset we have retrofit for space operations within 6 months. I want our nuclear arsenal adapted for interstellar delivery. And I want our best strategists gaming out scenarios for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of America's finest military minds. "Gentlemen, we're about to find out if the skills that made us the dominant military power on Earth work just as well among the stars." Unknown to the aliens, now scrambling to respond to humanity's emergence, they were about to discover that their worst nightmares about predator species were actually conservative estimates. The Americans were coming, and they were bringing 10,000 years of warfare evolution with them. 3 months after humanity's first FTL jump, the emergency session of the Galactic Council had devolved into barely controlled panic. The elegant crystal chamber that had witnessed countless diplomatic successes now echoed with the discord of 47 civilizations, struggling to comprehend an unprecedented threat. Councillor Vrax's harmonious voice cracked, with stress as he called for order. "Fellow beings, we must reach consensus on how to handle the human situation. Our intelligence networks report they've established surveillance satellites throughout their local sector." Ambassador Zephyrian stood to address the assembly, his Kalari physiology betraying the exhaustion of 3 months spent monitoring human activities. "Honored counselors, the situation is far worse than we initially calculated. The humans aren't just developing space travel, they're militarizing it." The holographic display showed Earth's orbital space, now swarming with activity that had increased tenfold since the Phoenix Rising's successful jump. In 90 standard days, they've launched 43 additional spacecraft. Every single one carries military-grade sensors, weapon systems, or both. Delegate Krenth of the Pacifist Alliance raised a gelatinous appendage, his slug-like form trembling with anxiety. "Surely they're just exploring. All species go through an expansion phase." Zephyrian's response sent a chill through the chamber. "They've retrofitted their nuclear weapons for space deployment. They're building ships designed specifically for combat, and they're doing it all while maintaining what they call plausible deniability about the existence of alien life." The ethereal collective's energy being representative flickered with distress. How can they prepare for war against species they haven't met? "Because that's what predators do," Zephyrian replied grimly. "They assume every encounter is potentially hostile. They prepare for the worst-case scenario. And they strike first. The chamber erupted in panicked, chittering harmonic wails and electromagnetic static as delegates from dozens of species struggled to process this information. For millennia, galactic civilization had operated on principles of consensus, cooperation, and mutual respect. The concept of preparing for unprovoked warfare was alien to them. High Counselor Vrax called for silence with a resonant chime that took several attempts to restore order. "Ambassador, what do you recommend?" Zephyrian's pause stretched uncomfortably long before he responded. "I've been analyzing their tactical doctrines, their military history, their strategic thinking. There's a phrase Americans use, peace through superior firepower. They don't seek peace through understanding or cooperation. They achieve it by being so dangerous that no one dares attack them." The hologram shifted to show American military installations being rapidly converted for space operations. "Look at their approach to this expansion. Other species would send diplomats, scientists, explorers. The Americans are sending soldiers." Delegate Thess of the Aquatic Confederation, whose species had never experienced warfare due to their ocean-based evolution, spoke in bubbling tones. "Perhaps we should make contact? Explain that we're peaceful? Show them that warfare isn't necessary." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Zephyrian's bitter laughter. "Delegate Thess, the Americans have a saying. Walk softly and carry a big stick. They'll speak of peace while pointing weapons at your throat." The ambassador brought up new intelligence that had arrived just hours before the session. "This morning we intercepted communications from something called the Pentagon. They're planning what they call first contact protocols." The display showed military documents outlining scenarios for alien contact that read like battle plans. Rules of engagement, target prioritization, escalation matrices. Everything approached from the assumption that any meeting with aliens would likely result in combat. "They're not preparing for diplomacy," Zephyrian continued. "They're preparing for conquest." The chamber erupted again, but this time the panic was organized. Species representatives huddled in emergency conferences. Quantum encrypted communications flew between homeworlds, and the ancient protocols for galactic crisis management activated for the first time in recorded history. Through it all, Zephyrian stood watching, knowing that everything he was witnessing represented the end of the galactic civilization he had spent his life serving. The careful balance of cooperation and mutual respect that had allowed dozens of species to coexist peacefully was about to encounter a force it had never been designed to handle. "Honored counselors," he said when order was finally restored, "I need to share one final piece of intelligence that will determine our response." The chamber fell deathly quiet as Zephyrian activated the most disturbing recordings his surveillance network had captured. "This is from a closed-door meeting of what the Americans call their National Security Council. Listen carefully." The voices that filled the chamber were calm, professional, and utterly terrifying in their matter-of-fact discussion of interstellar warfare scenarios. "If they're technologically superior, we hit them with asymmetric tactics. Terrorist strikes against their infrastructure. We make it too expensive for them to occupy human space. If they're roughly equivalent, we establish forward operating bases and project power throughout their territory, control the high ground and dictate terms. If they're primitive, we establish protectorates and extract resources to fuel further expansion." The recording continued for several minutes, outlining strategies for every conceivable scenario of alien contact. What chilled the listeners wasn't the strategic thinking. It was the casual assumption that every scenario would involve conflict, domination, and the eventual subjugation of alien species. "As you can hear," Zephyrian said when the recording ended, "they're not planning to join galactic civilization. They're planning to replace it." High Counselor Vrax's voice had lost all harmonic quality, reduced to mechanical tones. "What are our options?" Zephyrian's response would haunt the Council for generations. "We have three choices. First, we can attempt diplomatic contact and hope they're willing to respect galactic law. Based on their history, I estimate a 12% chance of success." He paused, letting the grim mathematics sink in. "Second, we can attempt to quarantine their system and prevent their expansion. This would require a military response that none of our species have the capability or will to execute." The final pause stretched for an eternity. "Third, we can prepare for the inevitable and hope that when they come, they'll allow some of us to survive." The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the background hum of life support systems became deafening. 47 civilizations, representing billions of years of evolutionary development and cultural achievement, faced the prospect of extinction at the hands of a species that had just discovered faster-than-light travel. But perhaps most terrifying of all was the growing realization that the humans weren't evil or malicious. They were simply doing what came naturally to them, what their evolution as apex predators had programmed them to do. They were hunting on a galactic scale. And as Zephyrian had observed in his reports, the Americans appeared to be the most efficient hunters their species had ever produced. As the council session dissolved into chaos, emergency communications raced across the galaxy, carrying warnings that would change the course of galactic history. The age of peace was ending. The age of humanity was about to begin. 6 months after the Phoenix Rising's historic flight, Captain Marcus Johnson of the United States Space Force guided his ship, the USS Constitution, through hyperspace toward what intelligence suggested was an alien monitoring station in the Vega system. Unlike the scientific mission that had started humanity's interstellar journey, this was purely military reconnaissance. "Captain," Lieutenant Sarah Chen called from the sensor station, "we're detecting massive energy signatures ahead. Whatever's out there, it's big." Johnson nodded, his weathered features betraying none of the excitement he felt. A 20-year veteran of special operations, he had volunteered for space duty when it became clear that humanity's expansion into the galaxy would require warriors, not just explorers. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We are approaching our target. Remember, we're here to gather intelligence and assess potential threats to Earth. If contact becomes necessary, we follow first contact protocols. Johnson out." What Johnson didn't mention to his crew was that the first contact protocols had been written by the same strategists who had planned the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. They emphasized overwhelming force, rapid domination, and the establishment of clear superiority from the opening moments of any engagement. The USS Constitution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system, and immediately every sensor on the ship began screaming warnings. "Jesus Christ," whispered Ensign Rodriguez from his position at the tactical station. "Captain, I'm reading a structure that's—" "Sir, it's the size of a small moon." Johnson moved to stand behind the sensor operator, studying the massive alien installation that hung in space before them. The structure was beautiful in its alien geometry, composed of crystalline formations that seemed to grow rather than being built. "Sir," Chen reported, "they've detected us. I'm reading multiple scanning beams focused on our position. Any sign of weapons?" "Negative, sir. No weapons signatures detected. In fact, sir, I'm not reading any defensive systems at all." Johnson felt a predatory smile cross his face. In his experience, only 2 types of enemies failed to maintain defensive positions: those who were completely helpless and those who were supremely confident in their superiority. Either way, it represented an opportunity. "Tactical, give me a full analysis of their structure. I want to know their vulnerabilities, power sources, and escape routes." As his crew worked to dissect the alien station's weaknesses, Johnson was unaware that he was being watched by beings who had never encountered anything like him in 10,000 years of galactic civilization. Inside the monitoring station, Senior Observer Cleth tried to maintain his composure as he watched the human vessel systematically analyze his facility's defensive capabilities. The crystalline Zephyri had built their civilization on principles of transparency and openness, concepts that made their current situation particularly terrifying. "Observer," his assistant Yan whispered, "they're scanning our quantum matrices. They're looking for ways to destroy us." Cleth's crystalline structure flickered with anxiety patterns that hadn't been seen in his species for millennia. "But we've made no hostile moves. We've shown no aggression. Why would they assume we're enemies?" The answer came from Ambassador Zephyrian's reports, which Cleth had studied obsessively since receiving word that humans had achieved FTL travel. Humans, and Americans in particular, didn't distinguish between potential threats and actual threats. To them, anything that could potentially oppose them was an enemy that simply hadn't declared itself yet. "Sir," Yan's voice cracked with terror, "should we attempt communication?" Cleth considered the option, but his analysis of human behavior patterns suggested that any sign of weakness would only encourage aggression. The humans had evolved as pack hunters who targeted the weakest members of herds. Showing fear or vulnerability would likely trigger their predatory instincts. Meanwhile, aboard the Constitution, Captain Johnson was reaching conclusions that would reshape humanity's approach to galactic expansion. "Captain," Lieutenant Chen reported, "I've completed the structural analysis. Sir, this station has no military capabilities whatsoever. No weapons, no shields, no defensive systems of any kind." Johnson studied the data, his special operations experience allowing him to read between the lines. They're either incredibly naive or they're confident that no one would dare attack them. "Sir," Ensign Rodriguez interjected, "what if they're just peaceful?" The captain's laugh was harsh. "Rodriguez, in 20 years of warfare, I've learned that there are no peaceful species, only species that haven't been threatened yet. These aliens have been watching Earth for years without our permission. That makes them potential enemies." Johnson moved to the communication station, his decision made. Open a channel to Earth Command. Priority 1 encryption. Within minutes, he was connected to General Hawkins at Space Command. "General, this is Constitution. We've located the alien monitoring station. It's completely defenseless." "Understood, Captain. What's your assessment?" Johnson's response would echo through military planning sessions for years to come. "Ma'am, we're looking at a species that's either supremely confident or completely helpless. Either way, they represent an intelligence asset that we can't afford to leave in alien hands." The silence on the channel stretched for several seconds before General Hawkins responded. "Captain, you are authorized to take whatever action you deem necessary to protect American interests. Make sure we get good intelligence on their capabilities." Johnson smiled. "Understood, General. Constitution out." He turned to address his crew, knowing that what happened next would establish the precedent for humanity's interactions with alien civilizations. "Gentlemen, we're going to make contact with these aliens. We're going to be polite, professional, and prepared to eliminate them if they pose a threat to Earth." The captain activated the ship's communication array, broadcasting on frequencies his sensors had detected the aliens using. "Alien vessel, this is Captain Marcus Johnson of the United States Space Force. You will respond immediately and identify yourselves." The response came within minutes, transmitted in perfectly translated English that somehow conveyed the speaker's terror, despite the clinical precision of the translation software. "Human vessel, this is Senior Observer Cleth of the Galactic Monitoring Network. We welcome you to interstellar space. We mean no harm and wish only peaceful contact." Johnson exchanged glances with his tactical officer, both men recognizing the fear in the alien's voice. In Johnson's experience, fear was either a sign of weakness to be exploited or a trap to be avoided. "Observer Cleth, you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance of Earth for years. From a military perspective, that constitutes an act of espionage. You will explain your intentions and provide us with complete information about your monitoring activities." The alien's response revealed just how unprepared galactic civilization was for humanity's approach to diplomacy. "Captain Johnson, we were simply observing. It's standard protocol for monitoring developing species. We meant no offense. Please, we wish only to welcome you to the galactic community." Johnson's tactical mind immediately identified the intelligence opportunity. These aliens had been watching Earth, which meant they had detailed information about human capabilities, weaknesses, and strategic assets. More importantly, they seemed willing to share information when properly motivated. "Observer Cleth, you will transfer all surveillance data on Earth to my ship immediately. You will also provide complete information about other alien species, their locations, and their capabilities. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war." The silence that followed lasted for nearly a minute before Cleth's terrified response came through the speakers. "Captain, yes, we will comply. Please, we don't want any trouble." As data began flowing into the Constitution's computers, Captain Johnson realized that humanity had just taken its first step toward galactic dominance. They had encountered their first alien species, established immediate superiority, and acquired actionable intelligence about the galaxy's political structure, all without firing a shot. It was, Johnson reflected, exactly the kind of efficient warfare that had made America the dominant military power on Earth, and it was just the beginning. 1 year after first contact, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session aboard the massive diplomatic station Harmony's Rest, located in neutral space between the major galactic powers. The crystalline chamber that had once hosted peaceful negotiations for centuries now buzzed with the desperate energy of civilizations facing extinction. Admiral Sarah Chen, formerly Lieutenant Chen of the USS Constitution, stood at the center of the chamber as the official representative of humanity. Her promotion had been rapid, reflecting both her competence and the speed with which human society had militarized in response to discovering the galaxy's political structure. Around her, representatives of 47 alien civilizations clustered in species-specific groupings, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, harmonics, electromagnetic pulses, and chemical signals that the chamber's universal translator struggled to process. Honored delegates, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying the confidence that had become humanity's signature in galactic affairs. I've been authorized by the United Earth government to present our terms for galactic integration. The silence that followed was the quiet of prey animals suddenly realizing they were surrounded by predators. High Counselor Vrax of the Melody, Confederation, found his voice first, though his usually harmonious tones cracked with stress. Admiral Chen, surely we can discuss mutual cooperation rather than terms. Chen's smile was polite and utterly predatory. Counselor, let me be clear about humanity's position. Over the past year, we've discovered that this galaxy has been remarkably peaceful. No major conflicts for over 10,000 years. No significant military capabilities among any known species. No defensive preparations against external threats. She activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy's political map, with human-controlled space already expanding like a cancer through the local stellar neighborhood. From our perspective, this represents a power vacuum that nature abhors. Delegate Krenth of the Pacifist Alliance raised a gelatinous appendage, his slug-like form trembling. Admiral, we've maintained peace through cooperation and mutual respect. Surely humans can appreciate the value of harmony. Chen's laugh was genuinely amused. Delegate Krenth, humans appreciate the value of peace. We just define it differently than you do. We believe peace comes through strength, not through hoping everyone will play nice. The hologram shifted to show human military assets now stationed throughout dozens of star systems. In the past year, we've established defensive positions around 43 inhabited systems. We've eliminated 17 piracy operations that your Galactic Council apparently couldn't handle. We've stopped 3 different territorial disputes that had been festering for centuries. Ambassador Zephyrian, who had spent the year watching his worst predictions come true, stood to address the human representative. Admiral, your species has brought stability, yes, but at what cost? You've imposed military governors on peaceful worlds. You've demanded tribute from civilizations that have never known warfare. Chen's response reflected the evolution in human thinking that had occurred since discovering they were the galaxy's only apex predators. Ambassador, we've brought order to chaos. We've established clear lines of authority. We've created a system where disputes are resolved quickly and efficiently rather than being allowed to fester for generations. The display showed before and after comparisons of systems under human administration. Trade had increased dramatically, piracy had been eliminated, and territorial disputes had been resolved with ruthless efficiency. The cost, however, was the complete militarization of galactic society. But perhaps most importantly, Chen continued, we've begun preparing this galaxy for external threats. The chamber erupted in confused chattering as aliens struggled to comprehend the concept of external threats. For species that had never encountered warfare beyond minor skirmishes over resources, the idea of threats from outside the galaxy was incomprehensible. High Counselor Vrax managed to restore order with a harmonic chime that took several attempts to cut through the noise. Admiral Chen, what external threats? Our long-range sensors show no signs of hostile civilizations beyond our galaxy. Chen's expression grew grave, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she seemed genuinely concerned rather than simply confident. Counselors, humanity has been analyzing the galactic situation for the past year. We've identified a critical vulnerability that threatens every species in this galaxy. The hologram shifted to show a comprehensive analysis of galactic defenses, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Your civilizations have developed impressive technologies for cooperation, communication, and resource management. What you haven't developed is any meaningful capability for military defense. She gestured to the assembled delegates, representing billions of years of evolutionary development. Every single species in this galaxy evolved from prey animals. You've built a civilization based on the assumption that cooperation and harmony are sufficient to ensure survival. The silence that followed was heavy with implications as the aliens began to understand what Chen was suggesting. But the universe doesn't care about your assumptions, she continued. Somewhere out there in other galaxies there are probably species like us. Predators who developed intelligence. Hunters who turned their aggression into technology. Warriors who see cooperation as weakness. The hologram showed theoretical invasion scenarios that made the assembled delegates recoil in terror. Fleets of warships sweeping through peaceful systems. Military forces that could overwhelm entire civilizations before they could mount any defense. Technologies designed for conquest rather than cooperation. When those species discover this galaxy, Chen said with grim certainty, they'll see exactly what we saw when we first made contact. A collection of peaceful, defenseless civilizations ripe for conquest. Delegate Theiss of the Aquatic Confederation, whose species had never experienced violence due to their ocean-based evolution, spoke in bubbling tones. Admiral, are you saying that war is inevitable? Chen's response carried the weight of 10,000 years of human military experience. Delegate Theiss, war isn't inevitable. It's constant. The only variable is whether you're prepared for it. She activated a new display showing human military expansion plans that stretched across the galaxy. Humanity is offering this galaxy a choice. You can accept our protection and benefit from our military expertise, or you can maintain your peaceful independence and hope that we're wrong about external threats. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was organized. Species representatives huddled in desperate conferences. Quantum communications flew between homeworlds, and the ancient protocols for civilizational survival activated for the first time in recorded history. Through it all, Admiral Chen stood watching, knowing that she was witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The galactic civilization that had existed for millennia, built on cooperation, mutual respect, and the assumption that intelligence naturally led to peace, was dying. In its place, humanity was building something different, a civilization based on strength, preparedness, and the assumption that the universe was fundamentally hostile. Honored delegates, Chen said when order was finally restored, I need your answer within 48 standard hours. Humanity is prepared to defend this galaxy against any threat, but we need to know who stands with us and who we'll need to protect despite themselves. As the session dissolved into chaos and the delegates fled to consult with their homeworlds, Chen remained in the chamber, studying the holographic display of galactic civilization. She knew that most of the alien species would eventually accept human protection. They had no choice. Their entire evolutionary history had programmed them to seek safety through cooperation and submission to stronger protectors. But Chen also knew that this was just the beginning. Humanity had found a galaxy full of sheep, and they had made themselves the shepherds. But shepherds weren't just protectors, they were also owners. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, other predators might be watching, waiting for their chance to test themselves against Earth's finest hunters. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of peace was over. The age of humanity had begun.